Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse currently sits at a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, placing it among the upper echelon of comic book movies and films in general on their very questionable rating scale. So once again, it is time for us to look at some of these Rotten Tomatoes reviews and try to figure out just how legitimate they are. Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
They're dead. Alright, can I go now?
So I've been doing these Film Criticism is Dead videos for a while now, and people still tend to misinterpret the point of them. This is not about attacking someone who has a difference of opinion than I do. This is not about belittling fans or even my own viewers who actually enjoyed this film. If you are a fan and got enjoyment out of this film on a large scale, then I'm happy for you. My issue is with Rotten Tomatoes itself, and some of the people on that site that call themselves professional critics.
What an idiot! Oh, what a loser!
As a critic, your job is to be critical. It's right there in the name. Unfortunately, a lot of modern critics come off more like fanboys than anything. Or worse, they tend to consistently insert their own personal bias into their criticisms. And if we're being honest with ourselves, that is not what a critic is supposed to do.
Why are you the way that you are?
A critic is supposed to give an unbiased opinion on the quality of a film they are watching. And I'm sorry, I just can't fathom a situation where a person whose job it is to be critical cannot find any flaws in a film like this. I've seen some of them even throw around the masterpiece word, a word that people use far too often now when they are being prisoners of the moment.
You're really talking about just raising your standards.
I have a rating tier in my own rating system dedicated to masterpieces, and I've only used it twice in my entire time of reviewing films. And that's for good reason, because a masterpiece to me is something that is timeless. And I don't believe that the Spider-Verse movies are timeless. In fact, I feel like there are a lot of things in these films that will date them in 10 to 20 years. Or maybe even sooner. They are very much a product of this time they are being created in. I believe a masterpiece is also something that is perfect from a filmmaking perspective. Quite literally, something that could never be replicated.
That makes sense.
Am I certain that another creative team couldn't make a better animated Spider-Man movie if given the opportunity? No, I am not certain of that. Even with me admitting in my own review that these movies really aren't my thing, I don't understand how a critic can watch it and say that it's flawless from a filmmaking perspective. I think it very much has tonal issues, has pacing issues, it has character issues, and I would argue that even though the animation is unique and should be praised for that, it's not always as pleasing to the eye as some people would claim. This movie actually gave me a headache based on how visually frantic it is.
It's not a tumor. It's not a tumor at all.
Now, I didn't hold that against it in my review because that really has nothing to do with the movie itself. That has more to do with how I absorbed it, but I thought it was worth noting considering we're talking about the overall experience, and a lot of the praise being heaped on this movie has to do with the animation. When it comes right down to it, I think as a society, we have a tendency to overhype things. And a lot of that may have something to do with how hard it is to come across decent movies now. And either critics are so desperate to like anything, or maybe they're just shills and are telling people exactly what they want to hear. Either way, let's look at some of these Rotten Tomatoes reviews and see if we can't get to the bottom of this. First, we have Kalichi from Movie Marker, who says, with incredible feats in animation and storytelling, not only is it one of the best Spider-Man movies ever, but it swings its way into the higher echelons as one of the best comic book movies ever made. Now, while this review is relatively harmless, and not as egregious as some of the dipshits on Twitter who are saying it's one of the best films ever, I do feel like there is a bit of a recency bias going on here with this movie. I do agree that the story is better than a lot of the comic book movies we've been getting recently, but that doesn't make it perfect. In fact, part of storytelling is crafting a story that flows properly. It unfolds gradually and organically. And to me, this story was bogged down at times by them trying to do too much.
You do too much. You're not Superman, you know.
We got Gwen Stacy's story mixed with Miles Morales' story, mixed with Miles' parents' story, mixed with the Dot story, mixed with a multiverse story. Don't get me wrong, there are interesting ideas, themes, and messages throughout, but there are portions of all of these stories being crammed together that felt a little bit dull and quite frankly unnecessary. To me, you could have told a tighter, better story in an hour and 30-minute movie than you did in a 2-hour and 15-minute movie. It feels kind of bloated.
Don't waste my motherfucking time!
As far as it being one of the best comic book movies ever, I think movies like The Dark Knight, Spider-Man 2, and even Logan, just to name a few, far exceed this movie. I never once felt as wrapped up in the story for Across the Spider-Verse as I did with all of those films. Plus, anytime anyone says that this new thing is one of, if not the best things ever created, again, I question that because it's the type of praise that modern critics throw around far too often. Next we have Brandon Avery of Just My Opinion Reviews, who says, I will need to watch it again, but after 10 Spider-Man films, this may be the best of them all. So many moving parts come together seamlessly in this near masterpiece for a comic book animation. At least he added animation to the end of that. I'll give him credit for that. But if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, you'll notice that a lot of these reviews are saying a lot of the same things. It's almost as if they have a trusty handbook that they go to every single time they need to write a review on Rotten Tomatoes. All the best one ever nonsense that people are spouting off is difficult to say after just one viewing.
Come on, don't bullshit me.
Many of you know, because I've covered this extensively on the channel, a lot of times once the hype wears off on some of these movies and people start to watch them more than once, all of the flaws in those movies start to become more and more obvious. All of those things that you subconsciously ignored while you were fanboying out in your seat. And I would argue once again that all of those moving parts in this movie aren't put together as seamlessly as this person would suggest. And then we have Doug Walker of Channel Awesome, who says, quote, we are at a point once more where animation is doing what live action can't. The future of cinema is in the Spider-Verse. While I will not argue that animation can sometimes pull off things that live action can't, saying the future of cinema is animation is a bit of a stretch. I would also argue that the beats covered in this Spider-Man movie have been covered before, slightly differently, but also better. Everything from the cost of being a hero to the toll it takes on your relationships, to the characters themselves, has all been done before.
Not impressed.
It should also be noted that this is the same guy who famously threw shade at Sam Raimi's Spider-Man on his YouTube channel. Arguably the most universally loved adaptation of the character to date. And at the very least, people have had enough time with those movies to gain a clear perspective on them. And just to show you I'm not as against this movie as it sounds, because again, I thought it was fine, just not a masterpiece from a critical perspective. Here's a negative review from Rotten Tomatoes that also misses the mark. Ty Burr of The Watch List said, I knew we'd get a sequel eventually, but I didn't expect them to suck most of the joy out of it. I actually think the joy in this movie was on par with the original, despite my boredom at times. To me, this is just another example of critics taking issue anytime a comic book movie takes anything seriously. The end of this movie is a downer of sorts, but it's also simultaneously the best part of it.
Damn right, that's the only way I work, Cap.
People need to stop being afraid of letting these movies have real stakes and real tension. Because believe it or not, those two things are ultimately two things that make movies better. Bottom line, again, I'm not saying you can't enjoy Across the Spider-Verse, but as a critic, I think we need to start holding critics accountable for their words. And that involves not allowing them to spout off the same tired praise and buzzwords and passing it off as valid criticism.
Y'all be cool. Nah.